Okay. Cooperative Legacy Project interview number 73, April 19th, 2007. We're visiting with Harvey Wollman, former Associated Milk Producers Division Manager. Harvey, where and when were you born?
I was born in McCook County in Bridgewater, South Dakota, 1940, September 27th.
Okay. And where was your family originally from? Wollman kind of sounds a little German.
The Bridgewater, Freeman area. Mm-hmm. Mostly Bridgewater is
Russian
where my
German?
Yes. Yeah, Russian German. Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Do you have brothers and sisters?
None.
Oh, okay. What was your father's name?
John B. Wollman.
Okay. You want to talk about him a little bit? What sort of person was he?
Well, John, my dad was just a farmer at heart. Believed on farming. We farmed 1/4 1/2 of ground, and he basically stayed at home and done his work, and never wasn't a real outgoing person. Just kind of did his thing, milked a few cows, raised some livestock, and then basically didn't venture very far away from the farm.
Yep, your traditional diversified farming operation.
Yes.
Doing a little bit of everything.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. What about your mother? What was her name?
Her my mother's maiden name was Cheddar. Her name was Katie Cheddar. Mm-hmm. And she grew up probably about 10 miles from where my dad grew up at. And they got married in 1930. And
hard times.
Yes, they went through the hard times. And my parents were very scared of the 30s, even after back in the 40s when you could have probably done some investing and took some risks and really made things happen, but they were scared to do that.
Yeah, very common thing for a lot of people that went through that, though.
That's exactly right, yep.
Did they talk a lot about their experiences during the 30s?
They just basically talked about how tough it was. They didn't really say a lot about, well, didn't have a lot to eat at times, and they just they butchered their own meat and, raised their own chickens and ducks, and my parents did that until they quit farming.
Yeah. Okay. What are some of your early memories from the farm? I assume this would be probably mid to late 40s when...
Oh, I can remember in 49 when we got electricity.
Okay.
Hit the light switch and the yard light come on. That was a big thing. That was in the fall of 1949. I was 9 years old.
Okay.
And I remember my parents picking corn by hand. I would be out in the wagon. In fact, I fell off the wagon one time between the wagon and the horses, and they got scared and went forward and just about run over me. So then Mom and Dad, being I was the only child and nobody to take care of me, and they had to pick the corn, they put a little 2-wheel trailer with a canvas over the top of it with a mattress in the back and pulled it behind the wagon. And that's where I played.
Now they were still farming with horses, though.
My dad was probably one of the last people in McCook County that got rid of his team of horses. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he had a team of horses. I'm going to say he had them clear into the 50s, probably 55, 56. Mm-hmm. He had a team of horses. He didn't really farm with them. He had a tractor he bought in 40. He bought a new tractor in 49, but he still had the horses to haul manure with, to mow some grass, and yeah.
Probably had to buy a tractor either before the war or after the war, but not during.
Yeah, right after the war. In fact, he had a new John Deere ordered, and it didn't come in, so he ended up buying a new International. Paid $1,600 for it. It was in 1947, I think it was, or 46, something like that. Yep.
There was probably long waiting lists then for almost anything like that that had to be made at factories that had been making war materials.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah. When you were young, what did you want to do? Did you want to farm? Did your dad encourage you?
Yeah, I probably did. I wanted to farm, but there wasn't really enough land there for me to farm with my dad, and basically I started working in the dairy.
life on the farm was quite a bit different in those days than
Oh yes,
40s and 50s than it is.
It was hard work, and you did a lot of manual labor that you don't do now. Yeah, I can remember going out shocking. Then we'd thrash. Dad had 4 brothers he thrashed with, and that was a big, long ordeal. And I remember going from. They each had a team of horses on the bundle rack. I remember in the later years they brought a tractor. So I was a young guy, and I got to drive a tractor for one of my uncles as we hauled bundled.
Okay. Did the neighbors still help out at that late date?
Oh, my dad had...
The way thrashing was in earlier years?
Yeah, my dad done this mostly with his 4 brothers. There was 4 brothers, and they all lived kind of in that same area down there, within 5 miles of each other. And so we'd go from one brother to the next brother to the next brother until the thrashing was done.
Okay.
Yep.
Did you go to country school or in town there?
No, I went 8 years to country school.
You did?
Yep.
Okay, what school was that?
Well, I graduated from Cameron 310, which is just 2 miles west of Canastota High School. Or Canastota, the town of Canastota.
Okay.
And I went to Bridgewater High School. Back in them days, you could go wherever you wanted to go. And basically, we lived closer to Canastota than we did to Bridgewater. But we went to church in Bridgewater, and I knew some people over there, so that's where I ended up going to high school.
Okay. What was country school like in those days? You're probably thinking the late 40s, 46 maybe?
Well, I graduated from country school in 53.
Okay.
Yeah. We had every grade. We had probably 3 in a grade. Some grades had 2. But I think we had probably 20 kids in school. Yeah.
What sort of an education was that? Was that...
Oh, I don't know. I thought it was all right back then. You know, you didn't know any better. Yeah. So. One school teacher with 20 children. You know. I enjoyed school. I enjoyed country school. I can't say that I didn't like to go to school.
Okay. What about high school? You say you went to Bridgewater?
I went to Bridgewater High School, graduated in 58. That was an experience coming off the country school, coming into the high school.
It seemed like the big city?
Yeah, we rode in on the bus, and the town boys were in there, you know, and of course I was the only one in my area, in my school, that went to Bridgewater, so I really didn't have any classmates. I only had one classmate in country school anyway, and she ended up in Canastota.
Might have been a little bit less of an adjustment if you had some other kids going along with you there.
But I knew a lot of kids over there. I had a couple cousins there and a couple friends in church that were there. They were a couple years older than I was, and so we got along good.
Okay. Yeah. When did you meet your wife?
Well, when did we meet? When I was a junior in high school. She was going to school there too, and that's where we met.
Okay. And her name is?
Her name is Peggy Yicht, Jucht. That's probably a name that you don't hear very often.
Yeah. But I've got one of those too. So.
Yeah. She grew up 6 miles south of Emory.
Okay.
And her sister and brother went there. She's the youngest. She had a brother and a sister, and she was the youngest of that family. And she ended up in high school there also.
Okay. Yeah. When did you get married?
1958. I was right out of high school when we got married. Yeah.
A little bit better time than when your parents got married.
Yeah. A lot better time. Yep.
Did you serve in the military?
No, I didn't. I was right in between Vietnam and the other wars, so I did. I was 1A for about 3 months, and then I ended up getting married, and then that was the end of that. So I never,
Okay. Was there a religious concern for you there? I don't know what denomination.
We're Mennonite. We're Mennonite, and I signed up for the draft. I have a lot of friends, a lot of relations that were conscientious objectors. nonetheless, say my mother was probably upset with me that I did that, but I never went, so it didn't make any difference, you know. Yeah.
Do you have kids?
Yes, we have 5.
Okay.
Two boys and 3 girls.
Okay, what are their names?
Okay, the oldest is Cynthia, and she lives in Larchwood. And Kurt is our next, he's a son, he lives in Fargo. And Cleet lives out in Rapid City. And then we have Sherry, who lives in Sioux Falls, and Christy, who lives in Canton.
Okay, scattered around. Mm-hmm. The grandchildren then too?
Yeah, we've got 13 grandchildren.
Okay.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Are any of them involved in farming?
No.
Agribusiness at all?
Not really. No. Cynthia's husband works for Novartis Lab out here at Larchwood. Mm-hmm. Kurt has a lawn care business in Fargo.
Yep.
And his wife works in a bank. Cleet is a Finnish carpenter in Rapid City, and his wife is a school teacher. Sherry is an attorney in Sioux Falls, and her husband's a contractor, construction contractor. Mm-hmm. And Christy is married to a chiropractor, Chad Thiessen, down in Canton, and she works for him in the office there. And by the way, Cindy runs a beauty shop in her house in Larchwood.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. When did you become involved with cooperatives?
Well, it's kind of ironic how I got involved. I was, after I got married and after high school, I spent 1 year up at Dakota Wesleyan, and then I didn't go there no more, so I was kind of home doing odds and ends around the farm. And I was in the farm one day, and the milkman come to pick Dad's milk up, and he said, we always give each other a hard time, and he said, well, there's nothing to do out here. He said, why don't you come to Freeman, and they need somebody in the butter room down in Freeman. And I said, well, I'll head down there, and spring I'll come back, and then I'll probably end up working on the farm or whatever. I went down there and I never left. Basically stayed right there. I was inside working in the plant for about a month. And the fellow that hired me was the division or the manager down there. His name was Valdemar Brun. He was transplant in from Denmark. He come over from the old country and started the co-op up actually. Anyway, he come into me one day and he said, what do you think of working in here? And I said, well, I'm not going to be in here that long when it gets warm out. And he said, really? So about 2 days later, he come into me and he said, I'm going to put you in a milk truck to pick up milk. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, who quit? He said, nobody quit. He said the Humboldt Creamery over at Humboldt just closed their doors and they went, we're going to quit buying milk and we need to go up there and you need to meet this guy with this truck and go up there and pick up some canned milk. Well, I had never driven a truck before, but he said, you come down here tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock, you get the truck and you meet this guy and you go out and start picking up milk. So I remember getting in the truck and it had a little 2-speed in there, Mm-hmm. I didn't know what that red button was for. I drove a four Chevy, or a pickup, a standard shift with four speeds forward. Well, I put this truck and then got it in high gear and going down the road to go meet this gentleman. All of a sudden, I pulled this red button up and it just kind of scared me how it took off. Well, that was the 2-speed. I had no idea what that was. So I ended up picking up a whole load of milk that day with that gentleman, people that wanted to switch over to us. The next day, I went back out and got that load and went back out and got another load. So I ended up getting 2 loads of milk out of that. And I was a can hauler, and I had my own route, and basically I did that for about 9 months. And then I had a field rep, or we had some field reps there that done procurement work and quality work that come in, and the one guy had quit. He was going to go to work for Terrace Park. So during them 9 months is when a new manager come in from from Redfield by the name of H. Willard Hansen. And he came up to me one day and he said, I need somebody to do field work. He said, I drove bulk truck. I drove bulk truck for about 2 years. And then he came up to me and he said that he wanted for me to do field work. And I said, I have no idea what field work is. He said, I'll teach you. And then I started doing field work and procurement work and buying milk and grading milk and checking milk. And I did that for about 5 years. And then in 1969, I was working for Farmers Dairy and Produce prior to 1969. Mm-hmm. That's when Associated Milk Producers come in and everybody merged together. Mm-hmm. That's when that was formed.
That was probably beginning was that still the era when a lot of you mentioned Humboldt, where a lot of those small town creameries were closing. And,
Humboldt actually closed before everybody else merged together. They closed about in 62 is when I started, and 69 is when all the mergers took place. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And basically, it's been going Associated Milk Producers ever since then, So that's kind of how it went. Yeah.
Did most of those small town creameries, did they have locker plants too? There was one in my hometown, North Dakota, that I remember had a locker plant as well as.
We had a locker plant, but it didn't have nothing to do with it.
Didn't have nothing to do with that.
No, we had cream and eggs for a while, and then we started buying bulk milk, in the early '60s, and that ended up getting to be big time, and then the canned milk finally went out of business, and it was all B bulk, and then it went grade A milk, and that's kind of what happened. Yeah. Yeah.
What attracted you to the cooperative form of business? It sounds like your dad had been a member of that co-op.
Yeah, my dad was a member of that co-op, and I don't know, it was just a place to work until 1969, but I seen Associated Milk Producers come in. And basically what happened in 69, Freeman had a lot of debt. They owed about $1 million some dollars to the dairy farmers there of equity. And Associated Milk Producers come in and said, we will pay back this equity in 10 years, 100% of the equity. So if they owed us $1 million, they was going to give us $100,000 every year to pay back to the members. And basically, that check was there just as regular as Christmas comes every year. And that told me right there that the co-op way is working. And that basically this money is coming back. And I've had people come up to me today yet and tell me that I still remember when I got my last check,
And previous to that, there had been some concerns amongst members. That
there was people, a lot of people in that area at that time that lost a lot of equity.
Yeah.
In fact, I know of a number of people that didn't get any equity. I know of a lot of mergers that went on at that time that it was like 60% of their equity or 70%, this type of thing. And the other thing that down through the years, one of the strong beliefs that our board had, we're always kind of the grassroots type co-op. I think today we don't have any money that's older than 11 years amongst the dairy farmers. And that's real important, I think. But there's a lot of these national co-ops that can go out 25, 30 years and don't care about it. And I think that's bad for co-ops.
There were in those days still a lot of small dairy farms. What was the average herd size about?
Well, when I started in 1962, we had 1,200 farms.
Yeah.
And we had 600,000 pounds of milk. When I retired, March 1st of 2006, we have about 135 accounts that was shipping to Freeman, but we still had 600,000 pounds of milk. No competition left. At one time, we probably had 5 pretty good-sized milk buyers in the area. There's no competition left, but we still had our 600,000 pounds of milk. Yep. Another illustration I can tell you is that when we started in canned milk, if we had 6 to 7 cans of milk a day, that was considered a big, pretty good sized dairy. Now, this is 10-gallon cans of milk. When I left, there's a farm down in Columbus, Nebraska that ships 7 tanker loads a day. So from can to a tanker load. That's how it's changed. Yep.
Mm-hmm. What sort of issues did you have to deal with other than probably expansion was going on for a little bit anyhow?
Well, basically in my position what we did was we didn't expand the Freeman plant because it was a powder plant.
Yeah.
And basically powder kind of went in the last few years has kind of been just at a standstill. There wasn't a lot of people that made skim milk powder. We basically just tried to maintain what we had, do it as cheap as we could, and we had a nice little operation down there at Freeman, which is still going. In fact, this last year, they're having a record year because powder prices are so good. They're about double of what they were 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. And in my position, my big thing was cost cutting. Tried to get the milk into the plant as cheap as I could. Tried to be as efficient in the plant. Accountability was a big thing. You wanted to have every drop of milk go through that plant. We worked on a grade and yield program. That was the important thing for us. Mm-hmm. You know, if our yield was up in, if we'd get 9.2 or 9.3 pounds of powder out of 100 pounds of milk, that was good. And there's times of the year that's better than there's other times. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you get clear down to 9, but you never want to get below 9.
Did you work with farmers at all in trying to increase their efficiency, to maybe more milk out per cow?
Yes, we had a program back in probably about 71, 72, and I don't know if you've ever heard of the gentleman's name, but he was a big mastitis person and worked for the National Mastitis Council. His name was Dan Norlander. Have you ever heard that name? Well, he was kind of the guy that invented a milk machine that would be easier on a cow. What happened was vacuum pumps are too small, vacuum lines weren't big enough, you wouldn't get the milk away from the cow's udder fast enough, and you had a lot of infection problems. We had mastitis levels up to 3 million was state standards at one time. Well, now it's down to 750,000. That's how much it's dropped. Uh-huh. That's how bad the infection level used to be in the milk. And of course, we'd go out and we'd work with dairy farmers to upgrade their milking equipment, change their milking habits, be more sanitary, and today we're talking shelf life of 30 days, you know, for whole milk on a shelf. Uh-huh. You couldn't have had that back then, you know. So, yeah, we worked a lot with farms. Primarily, I spent, from 62 till 83, I spent 99% of my time on a farm. But from 83 on, when I got into management, then I was a little less, but my joy was still get out on the farm. Uh-huh. Get out and get the manure on your shoes, and that was the fun part.
You were also, according to some information I've seen, a founding member of the South Dakota Fieldman's Association. Mm-hmm. Want to talk about what that was or is?
Well, basically, back as I talked about all these infection levels, and we didn't have a grade B milk house law in South Dakota. Our people could see that, or the people in the dairy industry could see that we needed some kind of laws. We needed you needed to have a milk room. You needed to have hot water in that milk room to where you could wash your equipment. And basically, we put some things together after about 2 years of meetings, and got it put into law that a certain time they'd have to have a hot water heater in the barn. They have to have the utensils hung up. You had to have a driveway to the barn that you didn't have to drive through the lot. You had to have certain levels of milk, bacteria levels or somatic cell count levels had to be at a certain spot and or a certain level. And we were licensed by the state to go out and then they give them a permit. We'd have to make inspections twice a year, and that's how that all started.
Okay. And I assume that this particular field man's organization was purely dairy.
Yeah.
Did you have the people from the other co-ops like Land O'Lakes?
Oh, sure. This was a state law that Land O'Lakes and the Mid-Americas and everybody had to have the same law we did. Yeah.
Had they been doing any kind of inspection in dairy operations? Not on
the grade B side. They did on the grade A side, and basically what happened on the grade A side was it was a city health guy that come out of Sioux Falls. If the grade A milk come into Terrace Park, for example, it was a city health guy that come out and made the inspections on the farm. Well, when this grade B thing went into effect, and the grade A people had kind of a fence around them. Well, then all of a sudden the federal order system come into play. And you couldn't sell grade A milk back in them years unless somebody had quit. There was a quota type thing. Well, when the federal order system come in, then anybody that qualified could sell grade A milk. Well, that opened up a brand new scenario of inspections, because this grade A barn had to have a different type of inspection than grade B. Now, the field reps were never licensed to inspect grade B and have any authority on it. So we had to either go through the state health department, or we had to have, like in our case, we had an independent inspector come out of Sioux City, Iowa, that protected our milk, and that's basically what we did, So grade A, I think grade A at one time was probably 20% of the milk in the state of South Dakota. Now I think if you probably have 5% of the milk left on grade B, would be a big amount. Yeah.
What was the attitude of the dairy farmers to these changes? Were they accepting, or did it depend on? Some of them probably quit dairying, maybe.
Yeah. This is a broad thing. You're going to get the guy that fights everything. The grade A guy liked it because the difference in price was about $2 a hundred at that time. And then it gradually went down probably to $1 to 75 cents a hundred more. But the grade B laws have gotten stronger now, or tougher. They really don't have a whole lot less than a grade A. But there was a lot of dairymen back then that just thought we were crazy, didn't think it was the thing to do. But they could see what was happening in the industry, and the price was better, and if they had that, and they bought. But there was a lot of people that just said, I'm not going to put up with it, I'm going to get out of it. And they did.
And most of them had probably already quit milking by hand. So
yeah. Oh, yeah. Pretty well most of that was out of. Yeah.
Those folks were mostly just selling cream rather than the milk.
Yeah, we had a couple guys that milked by hand that sold milk, but not very many. Yeah, probably one or two out of all of them. Yeah.
Were there still some like individual farms where they were selling milk to neighbors and so on rather than?
Well, they legally can't sell milk. The neighbor can come over there and get some milk out of their tank and leave them a donation, but they can't really sell it to them.
Yeah.
And I would be awful scared to sell a neighbor any milk because of what could happen. Yeah.
I understand today there's some kind of a movement where there are people actually selling unpasteurized milk.
Yeah.
Sounds
well,
like
that's what the problem is. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. What was the process of getting the state legislature to approve that? Were they pretty accepting of the idea that I assume maybe the State Department of Agriculture helped work with you on that?
We had the University of South Dakota on our side, and we had a lot of support. and they could see where we were coming from. And in fact, I think they were real helpful. In fact, nobody really fought us much. We did have a few hearings where dairy farmers went in and thought we were going too far off, but it was something brand new. I mean, it was a big change.
How about the health folks? Were the health department, did they?
They liked it. They thought it was okay. They didn't really, I didn't think that they bothered much, no. But like I said, some people just don't like to even see a change color in vehicles.
Yeah.
And they just, they fought it, and you don't like, some people just don't like to come out and see something hanging on the wall that says, I've got the authority to go to this milk house and make your inspection and tell you what you're doing wrong. Because a lot of that's philosophy, because I've seen inspectors drive in a yard, drive right by a farmer, wouldn't even look at him, go in the barn and write up something. All he had to do was stop and say, how are you doing today? I'm going to go down and make an inspection. The farmer probably said, I'm going down there with you. And they'd have got along great. I've seen battles. I've seen guys get run off the yards with hammers over their heads, and because they wouldn't talk to them. But you can't do that. You got to treat humans like humans. And if you do that, 90% of the time it's going to work.
There seems to be a general attitude here in South Dakota, at least in some sectors, of don't tell me what to do. I think we see a lot of that out in the West River country. People don't want any regulation.
We bought milk out in the Gregory area, in the winter area, and they're probably, there's nothing wrong with that area, but they're behind. They're behind what we are out east here. We're probably behind a little bit of what's going on in Iowa. And you'd see some of that.
Did as a field supervisor and a manager, did you get involved at all with in lobbying Congress on dairy policy?
Oh, sure. We had a program called the CTAPE program, and that basically is a political program that we would go out to farmers and ask for donations, and if there was a congressman, Johnson or Daschle or whoever it was. We thought that we wanted a bill that would be favorable to dairy farmers in this area. We would support them with some finances and hope for their vote. Did a lot of that.
Lobbying trips to D.C.?
I never got involved in any of them, but our home office did up in New Ulm, Minnesota.
Some of the board members?
Yeah, board members would go with our CEO,
Work with other dairy co-ops?
Oh, yeah. I worked a lot with, in fact, Mid-America and Land O'Lakes worked a lot with them. We were competitors, but we did, if somebody got in trouble with a plant that was down, we'd sell milk back and forth. In fact, I did a lot of swapping with milk because I was out in the Freeman area, and we went clear out to Gregory, went clear out to Winter. And then I took over the Plainview division in Nebraska, what didn't have any processing at Plainview. We just had a receiving station. And that milk would end up over in Sibley, Iowa or Sanborn, Iowa, which is about 180 miles. And Mid-America had some plants down in Nebraska. And we did a lot of milk swapping. They had milk in Iowa that would go into the Iowa plants, and I had milk in Nebraska that would go into the Nebraska plant. And we just keep the trucks off the road, and we work together a lot that way. In fact, we do a lot of that today. We supply Lake Norden with a lot of milk.
Does it seem like the dairy policy, at least in some ways, is more contentious than other elements of farm policy? I've seen at least dairy farmers themselves having a hard time from different regions of the country agreeing on what kind of policy they wanted.
Well, the main reason that is there's a lot of different scenarios in the dairy. The South is more or less a fluid grade A fluid milk thing. The North is your manufacturing thing, where we make cheese and powdered milk. Well, basically, we like to see things in the Midwest here different than they are in the South.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't have one national scale for the whole thing to make it really work smooth. So that's why you get the bickering back and forth. We at one time were the largest co-op in the country. We went all the way from the Canadian border to the Gulf of Mexico through the Midwest here. Mm-hmm. Well, it ended up we broke away from the South because their interests are so much different than ours, and that's basically probably been a plus for us because of that.
Uh-huh. Having to skip over a couple or three questions here that we've already addressed. Okay. You're also a director of the South Dakota Dairy Association?
Yes, I belong. We were a member of the South Dakota Dairy Association, and we had a dairy convention once a year, and we'd can bring speakers in, and we'd have meetings, and they'd talk about the new programs coming into play, and the new machines to make cheese, or the new thing to do with powder. Mm-hmm. And I was on that board, I think, 3 different terms for 3 years at a time. I think I was chairman 2 times out of that 3 years. Uh-huh. Yeah. Now they have kind of dissolved that. Well, it used to be 2 programs, the Fieldman Association and the South Dakota Dairy Association. Well, then the Fieldman numbers got down, the Dairy Association numbers got down, so we combined the 2. We still had our own identity, but we had our own money that the Fieldmen have scholarships, the money that they have in their program, the Dairy Association had. In the last 6 years or 7 years, that number got to be so small. And there was a group, the Cattlemen Association decided to join us. And wanted us to be part of that group. And they basically went out, and we still have our own identities, but basically they went out and they've started this Dairy Expo thing in Sioux Falls. And I was just out there this past month, and it's almost as big as the Tulare, California thing. Mm-hmm. I don't know how many vendors. I think they had 300 vendors out here. They had the National Calving Association here, Holstein Association meeting mm-hmm. last year or 2 years ago. Yeah, it's really a growing thing, and I think it's good. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Did you get involved in the checkoff programs?
Oh yes, yeah. We had. You mean like the dairy checkoff?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or the beef one too. Yeah, I think dairy guys are affected by
we had board members that were on that board. In fact, a good friend of mine up at Aberdeen, Gary Sharp, is on that with the beef board. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think you were also there was a dairy review board in Nebraska. Mm-hmm. And a dairy council in South Dakota. What are mm-hmm. those?
Dairy council in South Dakota was on that board, and basically that board, what that does was, it was part of the ADA program, mm-hmm. American Dairy Association, the advertising program, but the dairy council was the branch of it that went out that worked in schools. And that would promote milk in schools, would promote cheese in schools and ice cream in schools and this type of thing. Worked with school lunch programs and this type. And that board now is, the advertising thing went regional, you know. Mm-hmm. The Dairy Review Board in Nebraska was basically, the director inspections down there would call, there was about 10 of us on the board, and if there would be any changes in the laws coming up or something to take the legislation in Nebraska, mm-hmm. that's what we would do there.
Okay. Yeah. You talked about the school lunch program. Was that always an an important thing. I know when I was going to school, we'd have milk breaks.
Sure.
In grade school, anyhow.
That was a big thing. Yeah, school lunch program was a big thing, and now the big thing is the vending machines in schools.
Mm-hmm.
We've had a number of schools in our district that have put these vending machines in. Our board decided not to get involved with a lot of money to these vending machines because we're in so many towns and it would cost too much, but we will support it any way we can, or other than financially. And most of the places, I know Freeman has got 2 schools and they've got milk, a thing in each school. And basically what it is, it's support from the local people, but have just added money to it. They sell a lot of milk in the vending machines.
Is that kind of benefiting? Do you keep in touch? Does that benefit from some of the schools that are now saying, hey, we don't want to have pop machines, for example, in school anymore?
Yes, that's helping, but you don't compete with Coke and Pepsi where they spend millions of dollars a year. There's not that much financing there for it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Do you want to talk a little bit about mergers and consolidations? That has been going on for a long time. Does that continue, or are there still some small operations that have dealt with that kind of issue?
In this part of the country, there really isn't much left down in this area.
Yeah.
I can talk about the mergers I was involved in.
Yeah.
We ended up Trip Creamery. We took them over. Actually, I'm thinking it was probably in the 60s. We took over the Trip Creamery. And Bob Shelsky, who was the manager then, he was an independent. And he passed on, and his son grew up, Scott, and went back to college up at Brookings, or went to college in Brookings, come back and reopened it up. So we took it over again now about 7-8 years ago. And it was just a case where he just couldn't survive. The numbers are getting down, the kind of farms that he wanted. We were involved in a merger down at Scotland, which never happened really. It was they decided to go with New Cheese down at Hartington at the time. He said he would reopen the plant. We said we wouldn't open the plant. Ended up we hired a milk hauler and got 50% of the milk for nothing. Back in the early 60s, Armour Creameries in Mitchell, Farmers Dairy and Produce, which was who I worked for before '69, and Sioux Valley Creamery out of Sioux Falls. We decided we would take over Armour Creameries, and we took them over. They took the half of the north and we took the half of the south. That was probably in '64. And that was just basically a kind of a buyout thing. In '69 now, let me see what, there was some more. We took over Viber Co-op Creamery probably in about '60. That was a little creamery down there that just decided to quit buying milk, and we took their producers. I mentioned the Humboldt Creamery just went broke, and we went and got whatever we could there. But in '69 is when the mergers really started, and that's when Parkston Creamery actually become part of the Sibley Sanborn co-ops over there, and then we joined later on that fall with the Freeman Creamery. Who else was involved there? Laurel and Plainview, Nebraska, was 2 separate co-ops. They become one down there. We worked there. And then the Dakota cheese thing, that had to be, when was that? In the early 90s, when Jim D got in trouble with the government. And then we bought that place, So that's kind of where it went. But some of the big mergers I worked at, we had a big independent over in Wisconsin. It was called the Jim Falls There was 1,800 dairy farmers. There was 3 million pounds of milk a day in Chippewa County, which is right there by Eau Claire, Minnesota. And we merged that in. That had to be about an 87, 88. So them was the kind of, and there was a lot of small mergers down in Iowa. The Boyden Hall thing was that become AMPI, and the Sioux Center plant was another one that come in. That was AMPI. So there was a big movement back then. And basically, when the mergers all got done, you had Land O'Lakes, you had Mid-America, which is now DFA, and you got AMPI, which is like. In fact, AMPI just had a merger beginning of this month, Cass Clay up in North Dakota.
Okay.
Yeah, that become part of AMPI.
Is there any connection down south anymore? You mentioned it did go down to Texas.
Yeah, we had a lot of dairy farmers down in Texas. In fact, Texas, the southern region, was our biggest region. No, we have no. We don't go any further down, and we go to central Nebraska about. Not even that far down. Yeah.
Okay. Who is the dominant down there in that country?
DFA, Dairy Farmers of America.
Okay.
They are the biggest co-op right now. I think AMPI is probably. We're the biggest in the Midwest up here, but I think on a national level, we would probably rank in 5th or 6th. Yeah. We do $1 billion worth of business a year.
Yeah. Some people, I think, have been concerned, perhaps at times, that maybe federal dairy policy and how the price was set. That there was some system that had a different price. How far away from Eau Claire, Wisconsin, you were.
That's called a location differential. And what they did there was. For example, the best way to explain that is there was like a $3 or $4 differential from Eau Claire, Wisconsin to Miami, Florida. And the reason for that was the marketing administrator set that up so the people in Miami wouldn't be without milk because there's no dairy farmers down there producing milk. Well, the people and this is where this dairy policy gets so tangled up between the South and the North because they're pushing for a bigger differential. We're saying you don't need that bigger differential. And that's kind of the where you fight. There was 32 milk marketing orders in the nation. I think it's down to 13 now, maybe, somewhere in there. I think there will probably be even less coming up. There was a time when there wasn't enough grade A milk around for people to drink. Well, that's not the case anymore.
It's easier to move it around the country now.
Yeah. And there's enough grade A milk for everybody. And we say that there shouldn't really be any differentials. We could live with that better than we could with differentials. And there's a lot of politics, and it's a game they play. And
what has the attitude been toward? I know over in Europe, they in some instances they irradiate milk and then they can just set it on a shelf. I've been told.
Yeah, we do some of that. We don't do it with milk, but it's called aseptic.
Yeah.
Up in Dawson, we have pudding that you can put in a can and just leave it set out, or cheeses, some cheese sauces that can do that. Yeah. It's a heat treated thing. It's very expensive to do. You couldn't do it with a big amount, and really. I think the biggest thing that's coming in though along them lines is taking the water out of the milk when you transport it. If you condense the milk down to 38%, you can almost haul 3 loads in one, and that's what they're doing. And that's why there's a lot of milk coming out of Idaho today, and it ends up at Lake Norden and Le Sueur.
Really?
And what happens is they take the solids, the milk, the part that makes you the cheese, and they reconstitute that back in with milk, And instead of getting a 10 yield out of 10 pounds of cheese out of 100 pounds of milk, you probably end up, if you do it right, get 12 pounds of cheese out of it. I mean, you can just increase it that much.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. There's been a continual erosion in the number of dairy farms in South Dakota. How has that impacted? I know in some areas it's when you get down to just a few dairy producers left out there, it gets hard for them to find somebody who will bring a truck around and get it even.
We've always served everybody in our area. We've never let anybody sit. Now there's been some milk buyers that have done that. We have never done that, but it does get more expensive to haul. Some of the farms are getting bigger, so you go out with tankers and pick it up. It's a concern, but I tell you what, if you go out and pick up 2 tanker loads a day off one farm, 2 tanker loads a day would be like about 10 farms with 100 cows.
Yeah,
is what you're talking about. So, yeah, it's different. It's different than it used to be, but it's easier to haul milk. It's easier to haul more milk because you got bigger farms, bigger equipment, and fewer stops. And we have, for example, when canned milk, if you haul 12,000 pounds of canned milk a day, that was a big day. We've got guys hauling 250,000 pounds with trucks today and not working near as hard. So you can see how that's changed.
Yeah. Was the co-op involved at all with the Department of Agriculture on the promotion of dairy farms along the I-29 corridor? We hear about that being the ideal spot in the United States to dairy at, and I've kind of wondered a little bit about that. It sounds like a good promotion for the state, but I'm not sure that...
Our co-op was probably the most lax on that at all. And tell you why. We're a grassroots co-op.
Yeah.
And our board will tell us that if a dairy farmer comes out there and he wants to milk 1,000 cows, and if he wants to sell milk to AMPI, you go buy his milk. But for us to go out to California to lure these people in here, they say you're not doing that.
And they've even gone over to Europe to lure people.
Yeah. And we've had, and I've attended a number of meetings myself and promote AMPI. We used to have a fellow by the name of Roger Scheibe out of Pierre that put this group together with Yope Bolin. And in fact, I went to 2-3 suppers where we fed them and told them about AMPI. We didn't go out and get them, bring them in here. Our board says if they come here and they want to sell milk to you, you go buy it. But it's kind of a conflict of interest, for some of these to come in, but they're going to milk someplace.
Yeah. I've seen some information over in England where they were promoting that you kind of wondered about a little bit. They kind of suggested that South Dakota dairy farmers were kind of stupid, but the guys in England would be smarter, and if they came over here, they could make money where the guys here couldn't.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I've never. Yeah. Well, I can give you a good example. What happened down in Nebraska. Pierce, Nebraska is probably 15-20 miles from Plainview.
Sure.
And in fact, this guy that's shipping 7 tanker loads a day come into that area and wanted to buy a quarter of ground.
Yep.
And I never seen so many dairy farmers in that area. They just got nasty. They didn't want him around, no way. So he picked up his bags and he goes about 70 miles south to Columbus, Nebraska, down to a little town called Shelby. They rolled out the red carpet. They love him. He supplies. I think he's got about 40 people working. He buys their grain in their elevator. He buys all the hay around there, and they just love him. And he isn't causing any problems down there with odor and stuff.
Yeah.
That's the mentality you got of certain people versus.
Sure.
And if he would have been, he'd actually been 70 miles closer to a market up here than he would have been down there. But he wasn't going to fight the politics, so he just went down there and that's where he's at.
What is the average dairy farm size in South Dakota these days?
Oh man, that'd be. I don't know the average size, but there's not very many 40, 50 cow herds left. No.
Yeah.
Some of the larger ones are probably, I think there's a couple 3,000 cow dairies around. There's getting to be a lot of 1,000 to 1,500. It seems like 750 and higher is where these big ones have to be, right at 1,000 to make it cash flow.
Yeah. There was some interest here in the state, and I'm not sure what the status of it is now, maybe putting together some sort of an ethanol operation next to a dairy feeding operation where the methane could be used to for the fuel for the drying process.
They're talking about that right now down in Armour, South Dakota. Down there, they're talking. There was a piece in the paper here not too long ago, and then make a cheese plant out of it with the dairy. And but I don't know much, I don't know if you're familiar with the big dairy over here at Inwood, just south of Inwood. There's a guy who milks 4,000 cows.
Not specifically, but I'm aware of the
Shep Yesselstein. He's talked about some of that. No, I don't know if he's going to get to that point or not. Yeah.
You talked about Idaho. What's the average size out there? I've driven along there from Boise, along the interstate there. It seems like there's just some humongous dairy farms.
They're real big.
And a lot of dairy cattle, I suppose the steers being fed along there too.
Yeah. I would say they're probably 1,000 cows or more. Average. Yeah. I think so anyway. I don't know.
Yeah.
I know that the Davis boys from Lake Norden have a plant in Drome, Idaho, and there's another one there called West Fargo or West. It's the co-op out west out of Washington in the same town. And I think they're like 5 million pound a day plants, and they buy all that milk from very few farms.
Does it seem at all like I guess when I was in college I took a geography course, and it seemed like there were parts of the country that were maybe suited for dairy farming as opposed to corn or something like that, and there were like portions of Wisconsin where it seemed like that would be a natural place to raise cattle. But if you're going to keep them inside all the time and have to buy feed, then that advantage. But what do you do with that land then?
Well, I think the big thing with the big dairy is you need a milk buyer. You need to be close to a milk buyer. Transportation is a big item. The other thing is, I think they've proven that you can run big dairies up here in the cold. A cow likes cold weather. Now, everybody thought Nebraska was a perfect spot to dairy, and it probably is. And they can probably keep all the cows outside. But I've seen a couple winters in Nebraska where 30 days of cold weather has just about ruined a lot of herds because they have no place for them to go inside. The way these guys here milk cows, they open up these sides and let the wind blow through, them cows, I think they're so much more comfortable even in the summertime being in there than they are on the outside. So I think, the geography of saying you want to be in a mild climate, I think that just kind of went by the wayside a little. You get up northern South Dakota here, we've got severe weather up here. Look at the number of big dairies we got in this area. And they're doing well. There's a lot of dairies, there's a lot of big dairies. Their average per cow and their somatic cell count level is better than most of the small ones.
And if you're going down south, what do they do to keep the cattle in the summertime? It gets awfully hot and muggy down there.
They have sprinkler systems. And that's basically
adds a lot of expense, I would think.
That is probably a bigger problem because it's a longer season down there, and the humidity is so high than it is. So the cold up here our summers up here are a lot better for them, more friendly.
Sure. Okay. Let me see. Okay. Over the years, did you have a chance to work with some interesting folks that you'd like to talk about a little bit?
Interesting.
AMPI or some of the board or some of your co-workers that you were impressed with that were good folks?
Well, there would be a couple people that I would probably mention. One would be I talked about the old inspectors, and how when we started with the inspecting of the grade A milk, one of the things that I'll mention too in my whole years is probably one of the most important things to me was in 1968 we started buying grade A milk in Freeman, and I and two other guys were probably responsible for getting that started. And if we wouldn't have done that, I don't think the Freeman Creamery would be here today, because everybody was going grade A. All you big farms are going grade A. So then we got involved with the grade A markets, and that's when the federal order system come into play. And today we got 98% of our milk is practically grade A in Freeman. But one of the most important people that I probably worked with was a guy by the name of Jim Burkett. He was a grade A inspector. He was an Indian grade A inspector out of he called his business the Northwest Iowa Sanitary. That's basically what he called it. And he went out and inspected these grade A farms, and this milk would end up in the Wells Blue Bunnies. We do a lot of work with Wells Blue Bunny. We ship a lot of milk to them. He would protect that milk to go into there, and it would meet the qualifications. And we'd go out and inspect these barns, and just to watch him operate, he was just a great guy. And another guy that I would probably mention is a guy by the name of Don Gregg, and he was a guy who was our regional manager. He was a co-op manager, a division manager over at Sibley, just like I was at Freeman. And he's the one that actually put the North Central region together. We were used to be the Central region and the Northern region, and that was Northern Minnesota and Wisconsin, and Iowa and South Dakota and Nebraska was the Central region. Well, that was all put together, and I've watched Don operate for years, and just to control the board and bring new programs into play, and he would be another fellow that I really thought a lot of.
Okay.
Then I had some co-workers, like I had a gentleman by the name of Ken Ganifke, who was a Paynesville manager at the Paynesville plant at AMPI, and he was one of these guys that you could ask him any question you wanted to and get a good answer. And it's kind of that trustworthy thing. You always have these in the workplace. The next guy you wouldn't ask, but this guy you feel comfortable with doing it. Them three people would probably be the three people I really enjoyed.
Okay. Now I got a couple of questions that I just recently added to my list of questions that I asked people. During your years with the co-op, the dairy co-ops, what was your biggest disappointment? Did you have anything that disappointed you over the years?
Biggest disappointment. As a co-op, I've seen. Well, basically, the co-op is a farmer-owned business. Probably my biggest disappointment is I've seen the years added to a lot of equity that belonged to dairy farmers that was just kind of thrown out the window. Instead of revolving it in 10 years or 15 years, they went to 20. I think there's some things that's happened in the Midwest here with some of our regional co-ops that have done some things out in the West Coast and the East Coast that hurts the Midwest.
Yeah.
I think some of that's happened. And then I think there's some co-op people that just forget who they're really working for, because they'll do things that will hurt the people they're actually working for. It's not your money that you got a hold of; it belongs to the co-op. And I've seen some of that happen. Some of the decisions that our regional co-ops make, you wonder sometimes who are they thinking of. Yeah.
And on the other hand, what's the accomplishment you're most proud of?
Well, I think the accomplishment I'm most proud of is keeping AMPI together. When we had our board vote to separate from the South, that was a meeting that I'll never forget. The question was asked, and in 2 minutes we had a unanimous vote. And that kept the Midwest together. Mm-hmm. And what we've done here in the Midwest today, we are the largest cheddar cheese operation or cheesemakers in the world. And our equity program has been the best in the business. And I think our grassroots thing with the board members is one of the most important things we can have. And that's, I think, the proudest thing. I've seen other co-ops, and they can't believe what we do with our board. Mm-hmm. And I think that's keeping everything together.
Okay. When did you retire?
I retired the 1st of March in 2006.
Okay, so you're just still kind of adjusting maybe a little bit. Yeah,
well, it's been a year now. Yeah,
been a year.
Yeah.
Okay.
I actually started the 1st of March in 62, and I went to the 1st of March in 2006.
Okay. Mm-hmm. You talked about some co-op folks perhaps not necessarily remembering who they work for. Do you think cooperative education is being done well enough so that the producer out in the countryside, the farmer as a member, is aware as much as he should be of the nature of his business and
I think some of that could be better. I think our co-op is probably one of the better ones because we communicate very well with our people. Mm-hmm. We have seminars with our boards, and them seminars are for this education program. We have a YC program that the younger folks get involved in for future board members. Mm-hmm. Some of our best board members are people, probably 75% of them are people that have been in the YC. Mm-hmm. And
what is that? What's the
YC program? The Young Cooperators.
Okay.
Yeah, Young Cooperators. Yep. They have a contest that they belong to, mm-hmm. and you got to be less than 40 years old to be on that, mm-hmm. and then down the road. It used to be 30 years. Now they went to 40 years because there's fewer, and mm-hmm. yeah. But that's a good program. Yeah.
And
I think we do.
Changes
yeah. And then the change. The change in the area industry has been big.
Sure. Challenges facing cooperatives have changed over the years. What seems like the biggest one to you, or the biggest change in?
For the co-op?
Yeah.
Well, the biggest challenge for the upper Midwest here is the pricing thing that's going to take place. There'll be some changes in that coming up, and I think some of these national co-ops have got to the point where they're bringing in some imports, this type of thing, the New Zealand, the Australian thing. I think the biggest challenge for us is to control some of that, mm-hmm. and some of the legislation programs that are going on in Washington. The bigger the co-op, probably the more political clout you have.
Yeah.
And the political fight in Washington would be a big challenge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there probably are issues in that area that's similar to. I guess I was kind of surprised to see that we were importing wheat gluten from China for pet food even. We used to think of ourselves as an exporter.
Yeah, we have a co-op in this country, and I don't. They think they're doing the right thing, but they're in bed with New Zealand.
Yeah.
And what they're basically doing is they think we can produce milk for world prices like they do in New Zealand, and that doesn't work. Yep. That's not going to work. We're not going to have people here milking. Yep. So that's what you got to fight.
So what are you doing these days? You've been retired for
trying to keep out of her way. No, no. I basically we have grandkids in town here, and we spend a lot of time with them.
Have you lived here for quite a while now?
I moved here 3 years ago.
It looked like this is a new neighborhood here.
Yeah, we lived in Freeman from '68 till 3 years ago, and we basically moved over here because our one son that lived in Freeman, they moved to Rapid City, so we didn't have any ties there after I was going to be done working, and so we decided we'd probably try to move our house, and we sold it and moved here before I was done. And I was managing the Sanborn Sibley divisions too, so I was kind of halfway in between here. So that worked out pretty good. But other than that, we do a lot of motorcycling.
Motorcycling?
Yeah.
Harley Davidson? Or?
Oh, I got Hondas. I had Hondas.
Okay.
I've had.
Do they have big get-togethers too? Or?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah. We've. In fact, last year we were in Michigan at Mackinac Island. We were up to Copper Harbor, clear up in that area, and then in last fall we went down to Smokies. We went all the way down to Carolinas. And, yeah, so we ride a lot. Yeah, we like to ride. So.
Have you had bikes for a long time?
Oh, 20 years. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Always Hondas?
No, I've had Harleys. I've had 3 Harleys, yeah, and then I don't know. We have some friends that ride Hondas, and we belong to a Siouxland Goldwing Club. In fact, Memorial Day weekend, we're going to be coming to Pierre. It's probably about 10 of us on bikes, and we're going to come to Pierre through Nebraska.
Oh, okay.
We're going to go down to
roundabout way.
Yeah, we're going to go down to the Yankton area, and then we're going to go west on Highway 12, and then we're going to catch 1804 and come up that way along the river.
Oh, along the river there.
We're going to spend a couple nights up in Pierre,
and like following the Lewis and Clark trail along there.
Yep. So,
okay.
Oh yeah.
We're getting down to my last 2 or 3 questions here. What kind of advice would you give somebody today who was thinking about maybe getting involved, going to work maybe at a dairy co-op?
Well, I think the co-op is a good future, and I think if they're sincere in getting in there and want to work with the co-op and work with the board members, I think it's great. I will say one thing about a co-op. I think it's probably as rewarding as an independent. You get something accomplished in a co-op, especially if you get into management end of it and work with the board, and you get good people on the board, and I think it's a great way to go.
Okay. Would you describe yourself, and I don't get very many pessimists, but as an optimist or a pessimist?
Oh, I think I'm an optimist.
Okay.
Yeah. A pessimist don't like change.
Yeah.
An optimist, I've seen a lot of change, and I think probably you need to adapt change. You need change, and you need to look at it constructively. So I'd be an optimist.
Okay. And one last question, which is there anything that I haven't asked you that you'd like to talk about?
Well, really not. I don't, I think we've covered everything.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. We've been visiting with Harvey Wollman. Thank you for participating in the Cooperative Legacy Project.